Have you ever had your entire world turned upside down in an instant? That's exactly what happened to me. On the day of what was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, everything fell apart. My fiancé, the man I had been with for 8 years, disappeared right before the ceremony. And just when I thought I could handle it, I found a note. Not from him, but from my sister. Those 5 words shattered my life. He's mine now. What followed was a journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and unexpected revelations that would change everything I thought I knew about love and trust. Join me as I take you through this roller coaster of emotions, where I fought not just for justice, but for the power to reclaim my life. On the day of our wedding, my husband disappeared right before the ceremony. Hours later, I found a note from my own sister. He's mine now. I was left humiliated and heartbroken. Years later, I received a letter, not from her, but from him. I made a terrible mistake, it read. Please meet me one last time before it's too late. I held the letter trembling and read the final line again. Please meet me one last time before it's too late. 5 years after Eric abandoned me at the altar, he wanted to see me. But my mind wasn't focused on his desperate plea. It was spiraling back to that day, the day everything fell apart. Before we dive into this tale of betrayal and resilience, I want to thank you for joining Emma on her heartbreaking journey. If you're drawn to stories of people overcoming devastating betrayals and finding strength they never thought they had, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps support more content about women reclaiming their power after unimaginable loss. Now let's go back to that fateful wedding day that changed everything. I woke up that morning to sunlight streaming through the lace curtains. My wedding dress hung on the door of my childhood bedroom, a promise of the day ahead. My mother knocked gently before entering with a breakfast tray. I was too excited to eat, but her eyes glistened with tears as she set the tray down. "Hi, beautiful Emma," she whispered, smoothing my hair. "I can't believe my little girl is marrying her high school sweetheart today." The house was buzzing with activity, flowers arriving, bridesmaids with mimosas and makeup kits, my father pacing nervously in his tuxedo. Everything was perfect, just as I had imagined since Eric proposed under the old oak tree at Miller's Pond. "Has anyone heard from Veronica?" I asked, realizing my sister, my maid of honor, hadn't shown up yet. "She texted that she was picking up something special for you," my cousin Melissa said, helping me fasten the pearl buttons down my back. "She'll meet us at the church." I didn't think much of it at the time. Veronica had always been the spontaneous one, chasing bigger dreams beyond our small town of Millfield, while I found purpose teaching third graders. She had promised she'd be there for me today, and despite our differences, I trusted her. My mother's hands trembled as she secured my grandmother's pearl-studded veil. "Perfect," she breathed, stepping back. The room fell silent as everyone took in the final result. "Eric won't know what hit him," my best friend Jenna said, wiping away a tear. Mrs. Sullivan, Eric's mother, arrived just as we were about to leave. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "You've always been the daughter I never had. I'm so happy you're making it official today." The bridal party departed for the church in white-ribboned cars, leaving me alone with my father. He looked at me with such pride it made my throat tighten. "Ready to become Mrs. Patterson?" he asked, offering his arm. "I've been ready since 10th grade, I laughed, taking one last look at my childhood bedroom. The church looked like something out of a fairy tale. Pews adorned with blue satin bows, candles flickering in hurricane lamps, sunlight streaming through stained glass. 200 guests filled the sanctuary, practically everyone in Millfield. I waited in the small antechamber listening to the string quartet play Pachelbel's Canon, my heart racing with anticipation. Then came the first sign something was wrong. Pastor Wilson appeared, his brow furrowed. "Emma, the ceremony was scheduled to begin 10 minutes ago, but Eric hasn't arrived yet." "He's probably just running late," I said, though Eric was never late for anything. "Maybe there was traffic from his parents' house." Jenna pulled out her phone. "I'll call his best man." The minutes stretched painfully. My father loosened his tie, checking his watch repeatedly. Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. "I can't reach Mark," Jenna whispered, referring to Eric's best man. "He's not answering." Pastor Wilson cleared his throat. "The guests are getting restless. Should we make an announcement?" "No," I said firmly. "Eric will be here. He has to be." Another 20 minutes passed with increasingly frantic phone calls. My stomach tightened as I heard whispers from the hallway. "Try calling Veronica again," I urged Melissa. "Maybe she knows something." Melissa's expression shifted as she dialed. "Her phone's going straight to voicemail, and Emma, she never showed up with whatever she was picking up for you." A horrible thought began to form, too awful to acknowledge. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. Then Mrs. Sullivan burst into the room, her face pale. "I just called our house. The housekeeper says Eric came home after the rehearsal dinner, packed a bag, and left early this morning. He didn't say where he was going." The room started to spin. This couldn't be happening, not to us, not after 8 years together. "I need to sit down," I whispered. That's when Pastor Wilson entered with an envelope. "Emma, this was just delivered to the church office for you." I recognized the handwriting immediately, Veronica's looping script. With trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope and unfolded the note. "He's mine now. Don't try to find us." 5 words that shattered my world. I read them again, unable to process their meaning. The note slipped from my fingers as a strangled sound escaped my throat. My father caught me as I buckled. "Emma, what is it?" he asked, but I couldn't speak. Mrs. Sullivan picked up the note, her face crumpling as she read it aloud. "No," she gasped. "He wouldn't." But he had. My fiancé and my sister. The betrayal was so complete it felt like physical pain. What followed is a blur of humiliation. My father standing before our friends and neighbours, his voice breaking as he announced there would be no wedding today, the collective gasp that echoed through the sanctuary. Mrs. Sullivan collapsing into her husband's arms, the pitying glances and hushed whispers as guests filed out. "Poor Emma, can you believe Veronica would do such a thing? Always knew that girl was trouble." How will Emma face anyone after this? I sat immobile in my wedding dress, unable to cry, unable to speak, as my mother methodically removed the veil and the pins from my hair. It wasn't until later that evening, after I changed into sweatpants and sat numb in my childhood bedroom, that the full extent of their betrayal became clear. Eric's father discovered their joint bank account had been emptied the day before. My mother found Veronica's closet completely cleared out. Not hastily packed, but methodically emptied, suggesting weeks of planning. The final blow came when Mrs. Sullivan called, her voice hollow with shock. "Emma, we found receipts in Eric's trash. 2 one-way tickets to New York purchased 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks while I was writing my vows and choosing flower arrangements, they had been planning to devastate me." While Eric kissed me goodnight after our rehearsal dinner, promising to see me at the altar, he knew he was lying. And that's when I broke. Sobs tore through me until I could barely breathe. My mother held me just like when I was a child, helpless to ease the pain I felt as an adult. How could they do this to me? I kept asking myself, but there was no answer. Not that night, nor in the days that followed. Only the certainty that the 2 people I had trusted the most had conspired to break my heart in the most public and humiliating way possible. Little did I know then, their betrayal was only the beginning of a far more twisted story than I could have ever imagined. The first day back at Pinewood Elementary tested every ounce of strength I had left. 6 weeks after what people now referred to as the Patterson-Turner incident, I stood outside my classroom door, gripping my lesson planner until my knuckles turned white. Principal Davis had offered me extended leave. "Take all the time you need, Emma." But staying home with my thoughts was worse than facing the whispers. I smoothed my navy dress, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. 23 third graders looked up at me with innocent curiosity. blissfully unaware that their teacher had become the centerpiece of Millfield's most scandalous gossip. The children were my salvation in those early days. Their uncomplicated needs and genuine affection formed a protective barrier against the adult world's cruelty. "Good morning, Miss Turner," they chorused. For those precious hours, I could pretend my life hadn't fallen apart. The teacher's lounge, however, was another matter entirely. Conversations halted when I entered. Sympathetic smiles barely concealed morbid fascination. Diane Winters, who taught 4th grade, tried to act normal by asking about my summer curriculum plans, but her eyes kept darting to my bare ring finger. "I heard they were planning it for months," I overheard the new music teacher whisper in the copy room. "Her own sister. Can you imagine?" I became an expert at pretending not to notice, holding my head high while walking through the grocery store as conversations hushed, smiling politely when well-meaning strangers offered unsolicited advice. "You're better off without him, honey. Some men just can't be trusted. She did you a favor. Imagine if you'd married him and discovered the truth later." Home offered little respite. My mother's monthly updates about Veronica came with painful regularity, despite my protests that I didn't want to know. Veronica posted photos from the Hamptons, mentioning one Sunday dinner 6 months after the non-wedding. "They look happy," my mother said. I pushed my pot roast around my plate, trying to ignore the sting. "Mom, please." "I know it hurts, Emma," she said, "but she's still my daughter. I can't just pretend she doesn't exist." My father's hand covered mine. "Your mother's caught in the middle, sweetheart." I understood their impossible position, loving 2 daughters who could never again be in the same room. But it didn't make it easier to hear about Veronica's glamorous New York life with the man who was supposed to be my husband. "They've rented an apartment in Manhattan," my mother continued, unable to help herself. "Eric found work at some investment firm. Veronica says—" I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need to grade papers." It was Martha Sullivan who became my unexpected lifeline. Eric's mother appeared on my doorstep one rainy April evening, clutching a casserole dish, her eyes red-rimmed. "I keep making too much food," she said simply. "Old habits." We sat in my small living room, 2 abandoned women united by the same betrayal, both having aged a decade in a few months. The proud matriarch of Millfield's most respected family, now diminished by her son's actions. "Robert barely speaks anymore," she confided, referring to her husband. "Just sits in his study, staring at old photos. He won't even say Eric's name." Our Tuesday evening dinners became a ritual, neither of us acknowledging it, but both of us desperately needing it. We never discussed them at first. The unspoken rule was to avoid it, instead talking about her garden, my students, the books we'd read, safe topics that allowed us to momentarily forget what connected us. Then, one evening, she brought a photo album. "I found this while cleaning," Martha said, her voice catching. "Our family trip to Lake George. You were there the summer after junior year." The photos showed teenagers in swimsuits laughing on a dock. Eric had his arm around me, Veronica sulking in the background. "She always wanted what you had," Martha whispered, her finger tracing my sister's image. "We should have seen it." Dating seemed impossible in Millfield, but loneliness drove me to try. Jason Crawford, who managed the local bank, took me to dinner 14 months after my non-wedding. He was kind, attractive, and completely wrong. "I've always had a crush on you," he admitted over dessert, "even in high school." What he didn't say, what hovered unspoken between us, was that I was now attainable, no longer Eric Patterson's girl. The evening ended with an awkward kiss and my promise to call him. I never did. Then came Daniel, a history teacher from the neighbouring district who hadn't grown up in Millfield and didn't know my story. Our relationship lasted 3 months before he heard it from a colleague. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "Because I wanted to be Emma, not poor Emma for once," I replied. He left, unable to handle the baggage I carried, or more truthfully, the town's obsession with it. After him came Michael, then Peter, each attempt ending in the same uncomfortable realization. I wasn't just dating them. I was dating my history, my humiliation, the collective memory of my most painful moment. You should move away, Jenna suggested during one of her visits from Chicago. Start fresh somewhere no one knows you. But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like letting them win. Millfield was my home. I would teach its children, tend my garden, and eventually the whispers would fade. I constructed a life of careful routine: Monday staff meetings, Tuesday dinners with Martha, Wednesday book club at the library, Thursday volunteering at the animal shelter, weekends spent grading and lesson planning. I planted tomatoes in the summer, carved pumpkins in the fall, built snowmen with neighborhood kids in the winter, and planted flowers in the spring. My days became predictable, controllable. Yet, beneath this carefully orchestrated existence, a bitterness festered, one I couldn't quite contain. It emerged in unexpected moments when a student announced her mother was having a baby, and I realized I'd lost not just Eric, but the future we'd planned. When wedding invitations arrived, and I made excuses not to attend. When I drove past the house we had planned to buy on Maple Street, now occupied by the Johnsons and their 3 children. You need to forgive them, Pastor Wilson suggested during one of his well-meaning visits. Not for their sake, but for yours. But forgiveness felt impossible when the wounds remained so fresh, when my sister's occasional phone calls to our parents never included an apology, when Eric had simply vanished from my life without a backward glance. So I lived among the whispers, wearing my dignity like armor, finding purpose in my 3rd graders' achievements and comfort in Martha's understanding. I had convinced myself that this half-life was enough, that the safety of my routines made up for the emptiness inside me. Until the day the letter arrived from Demura prison, and the carefully constructed fortress I had built around myself began to crumble. The envelope came on a Tuesday in April, unremarkable except for the stamped return address. Demura, Correctional Facility. The mail carrier handed it to me with the same indifferent manner he showed when delivering the electric bill, unaware that he was delivering an earthquake in paper form. I recognized Eric's handwriting immediately, slightly slanted letters, the way he crossed his T's with a flourish. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 5 years of carefully constructed normalcy felt threatened by this unexpected intrusion from the past. I placed it on the kitchen table unopened and carried on with my evening routine, grading spelling tests, watering the African violet Martha had given me, making a simple dinner I barely tasted. The envelope sat there like an unexploded device demanding attention. I refused to give in. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, imagining countless scenarios. Was it an apology? A request for money? Some final twist of the knife? By morning, the envelope remained unopened. My curiosity battled with my instinct for self-preservation. "You got a letter from who?" Jenna exclaimed when I called her during my lunch break, seeking guidance. "I haven't opened it yet," I admitted, huddled in the corner of the teacher's lounge. "Throw it away," she said firmly. "Nothing good can come from reopening that wound." Perhaps she was right, but I couldn't bring myself to dispose of it. For 2 more days, the envelope followed me from table to counter to bedside table. Its presence was a constant reminder of the past I couldn't quite escape. On the 3rd evening, after a glass of wine and Martha's cancelled dinner plans, I finally slid my finger under the flap. "Dear Emma, I never expected to write this letter, and you have every right to throw it away unread, but circumstances have forced my hand. I've been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe less. I know I don't deserve your time or forgiveness, but before I die, I need to see you one last time. I made a terrible mistake. Please meet me before it's too late. There are things you need to know, truths I should have told you years ago. The visiting hours are listed on the back of this page. If you decide to come, I understand if you don't. Eric, I read it twice, then a 3rd time. my emotions cycling between shock, anger, and a vindictive satisfaction that I immediately felt ashamed of. Prison sentences he never expected when he drove away from Millfield with my sister. I flipped the page, finding the printed visiting schedule and another handwritten note. I'm at Clinton Correctional Facility in Demura. Inmate A, 784219, convicted of securities fraud and wire fraud. 5-year sentence, 2 years served. The internet quickly filled in the blanks. A search for Eric Patterson and securities fraud led me to a Wall Street Journal article from 3 years ago. Rising star broker sentenced in $4.2 million investment scheme. There was a mugshot, Eric's confident smile replaced by hollow eyes and gaunt cheeks. According to the article, he had created an elaborate Ponzi scheme targeting wealthy investors, promising extraordinary returns that initially materialized through new investors' money before the inevitable collapse. No mention of Veronica, just Eric described as a calculating predator who betrayed the trust of clients who had believed in him. The school librarian found me hunched over the computer after hours, tears streaming down my face. "Emma, are you all right?" she asked. I quickly closed the browser. "Just reading a sad story," I lied. That night I sat on my porch swing, letter in hand, completely adrift. Part of me, the still wounded part, felt a dark satisfaction. The man who had humiliated me was suffering, imprisoned, dying. Wasn't that the justice I secretly craved during those endless nights after the non-wedding? Yet another voice whispered, this changed nothing. Whatever truths Eric wanted to share couldn't undo the devastation he and Veronica had caused. Why reopen healed wounds? Why give him the closure he sought when he denied me mine? I did what I always did when truly conflicted. I called Martha. "He's dying," I said when she answered, my voice cracking. "Who's dying?" she asked, her breath sharp. "Eric." The name felt foreign on my tongue after years of avoiding it. He wrote me from prison. Pancreatic cancer. Silence stretched between us, heavy with shared pain. "Have you told Robert?" she finally asked. "Not yet," I whispered. Her voice sounded distant. "What does he want from you?" "To see me. He says there are things I need to know." Martha sighed, a sound of a woman who had exhausted her capacity for grief. "Will you go?" she asked softly. "I don't know," I replied, though even as I said it, I recognized the lie. Some gravitational pull was already drawing me toward Demura, toward answers I both craved and feared. "Would you? If you were me?" I asked. I've imagined conversations with my son every day for 5 years. What I'd say, what he'd say, the questions I'd ask. But imagination is safe. Reality might break us all over again. After we hung up, I sat, watching fireflies emerge in my small backyard, their brief flashes of light punctuating the darkness. 5 years ago, my future had seemed as clearly mapped as the streets of Millfield. Now I stood at another crossroads, unsure which path led to healing and which to fresh pain. By morning, my decision was made. I requested a week's personal leave from Principal Davis, packed a small suitcase, and plotted the route to Demura on my GPS. A 6-hour drive north to the edge of the Adirondacks. Martha appeared as I was loading my car, holding a thermos of coffee and a tin of homemade cookies. "Provisions," she said simply, pressing something into my palm. It was a small, smooth stone with the word courage etched into its surface. "Whatever you discover, whatever he tells you, remember, you've survived the worst already." The drive north gave me too much time to think, to rehearse the confrontation awaiting me. Would I be cold and distant? Would I scream the questions that had haunted me for years? Would I sit in silence, forcing him to fill the void he'd created? I practiced possible scenarios aloud as miles of highway unspooled before me. How could you do this to me? I asked myself. Was any of it real, or was I just convenient until something better came along? Did you laugh about it afterward? Did you both find it amusing? Poor, naive Emma, waiting at the altar. By the time I checked into a Spartan motel 20 minutes from the prison, my emotions had cycled through rage, grief, curiosity, and exhaustion. Tomorrow I would face the man who had shattered my world. Tomorrow I would finally get answers. What I couldn't know, as I lay sleepless in that unfamiliar bed, was that Eric's revelations would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my sister, my ex-fiancé, and the betrayal that had defined the last 5 years of my life. Clinton Correctional Facility loomed ahead, its towering stone walls and guard towers standing in stark contrast to the serene Adira landscape surrounding it. I sat in my car, clutching Martha's Courage stone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The clock on my dashboard read 9:47 a.m. Visiting hours would begin at 10 a.m. After a sleepless night rehearsing what I would say, the moment of confrontation had finally arrived. I applied lipstick with trembling hands, a small shield of normalcy against what awaited me inside. The processing area reeked of disinfectant and recycled air. I surrendered my belongings, passed through metal detectors, and endured the scrutinizing gaze of corrections officers. My visitor's badge felt like a brand against my blouse. "First time?" asked an older woman ahead of me in line, her weathered face kind. I nodded, unable to explain my presence to a stranger. "It gets easier," she offered, though nothing about this felt like something I should get used to. The visiting room wasn't as grim or chaotic as I had imagined from TV shows. Tables were bolted to the floor, and vending machines hummed along one wall. Families huddled together, mothers bouncing babies on their laps, children showing drawings to men in identical green uniforms, couples holding hands across tables under the watchful eyes of guards. I almost didn't recognize him. The Eric Patterson who had disappeared from Millfield bore little resemblance to the hollow-cheeked man who approached my table. Prison had stripped away his golden boy confidence, along with £20 he couldn't afford to lose. His once athletic frame now appeared fragile beneath the standard-issue uniform. Cancer had done the rest. His complexion held the sickly undertone of illness, and his eyes, those blue eyes that had once made my heart race, were sunken, rimmed with shadows. Emma. My name emerged like a prayer from lips I once knew better than my own. You came. I hadn't planned to stand, but my body moved automatically. For a disorienting moment, I thought he might try to embrace me. Instead, he extended his hand formally, as if we were strangers meeting at a business function. I didn't take it. We sat across from each other, the cheap laminate table a canyon between our separate worlds. Up close, I could see the yellow tinge to his skin, jaundice, a sign that the cancer had spread to his liver. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I wasn't sure you would," I said. The words came out colder than intended. A sad smile flickered across his face. "I deserve that. I deserve all your anger," he continued. "What I deserve is an explanation." 5 years is a long time to wait, I countered. Eric's eyes dropped to his hands, thinner with bitten nails, a far cry from the manicured fingers that had once slid a diamond ring onto mine. "I wouldn't have reached out," he swallowed hard, "if circumstances hadn't forced my hand." "You mean dying?" I said bluntly. He flinched at my words but nodded. 3 months, maybe less. Something about facing the end makes you take inventory of your mistakes. And I was, what? Your biggest regret? My voice cracked despite my determination to stay composed. "One of many," he said, looking up and meeting my gaze, "but not for the reasons I thought." For the next hour, Eric unraveled a story so twisted that I could barely process it. Their escape to New York, the perfect new life I had imagined they were building on the ruins of mine, had quickly soured. "Veronica changed once we got to the city," he explained. "It was like watching someone shed their skin. The woman I thought I loved disappeared, replaced by someone obsessed with status, money, connections." "So you turned to fraud?" I couldn't hide the disgust in my voice. "Not at first. He shook his head. I got a legitimate job at Meridian Investments. Worked 16-hour days trying to build something that would justify everything we left behind. His voice faltered. Justify destroying me. Pain flashed across his face. Nothing could justify that, I said softly. Veronica, meanwhile, had grown increasingly dissatisfied. The apartment wasn't luxurious enough, and his salary, though substantial for a newcomer, couldn't support the lifestyle she craved. The glamorous social media posts my mother had described, designer clothes, exclusive restaurants, Hamptons weekends, were financed by maxed-out credit cards and mounting debt. She kept saying we deserved more, Eric continued. We hadn't taken this risk just to live like everyone else. The first questionable investment came 6 months after they arrived in New York. A small manipulation of client funds quickly replaced before anyone noticed. Then another. Each time the stakes grew higher, the schemes more elaborate. It was Veronica who suggested creating the investment fund, Eric admitted, his voice hollow. She had an incredible mind for it, identifying wealthy targets, crafting the perfect pitch. I was just the front man, the trusted face with the finance background. I felt physically ill. You're saying my sister masterminded a multi-million-dollar fraud? She did more than that. Eric's eyes held a haunted look. She planned her exit strategy from the beginning. Not just from Millfield, or from you. From me. 18 months ago, as federal investigators began closing in, Veronica had disappeared one morning. Eric woke to an empty bed, emptied accounts, and altered documents throughout their home office that implicated him as the sole architect of the fraud. She took everything, the cash, the offshore accounts, even jewelry she could pawn, leaving him with nothing but fabricated evidence, perfectly organized for the FBI to find. I wanted to disbelieve him, to label this as another manipulation. Yet something in his defeated posture, the utter lack of self-preservation in his confession, rang true. Why would she do this? I whispered. Eric reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper, sliding it across the table. A guard stepped forward, but Eric raised his hands. Just a letter. She's allowed to see it. The paper was worn thin from repeated folding and unfolding. I recognized Veronica's handwriting immediately. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Did you really think this was about us? You were just a stepping stone. Thanks for taking the fall. Don't try to find me. You won't succeed. V. The breath left my lungs in a rush. 5 simple sentences confirmed every insecurity I had ever felt about my beautiful, ambitious, dangerous sister. I was a means to an end for her, Eric said quietly. And so were you. I stared at him across the table, truly seeing him for the first time, not as the villain of my story, but as another victim of Veronica's calculated games. We were both pawns, I said, the realization washing over me like ice water. Eric nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something else, a question he seemed afraid to ask. A guard announced that visiting hours were ending. Inmates began saying their goodbyes, hugging children and kissing partners. Eric and I sat motionless, connected by a shared betrayal neither of us had fully understood until this moment. I have so many questions, I finally managed. Come back tomorrow, he said, a plea in his voice. There's more you need to know. As I drove back to my motel, my sister's note burned in my pocket like a live coal. The woman who had shared my childhood bedroom, who had braided my hair for prom, who had stood beside me as I chose my wedding dress, had been plotting against us both all along. The question that haunted me wasn't why Eric had left me at the altar anymore. It was why Veronica had hated me enough to orchestrate our mutual destruction. I returned to Millfield with Eric's medical power of attorney in my purse and a mission burning in my mind. The remainder of the school year passed in a blur, teaching, grading, final projects, attending the 5th grade graduation. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the new intensity that had replaced 5 years of careful numbness. You seem different, Principal Davis remarked during our end-of-year meeting. More present. I smiled without explanation. How could I tell her that rage had awakened something in me? Not the impotent anger I'd nursed after being left at the altar, but a focused fury directed at the true architect of my pain. The day after school ended, I turned my dining room into an investigation headquarters. Maps, timelines, and notes covered every inch of the walls. I devised a methodical plan, starting with everything Eric had told me during our prison visits after she disappeared. I had hired a private investigator, and his voice, weaker each time we met, finally crumbled when he admitted that he had exhausted his resources before the arrest. His efforts had led him to Charleston, but then the trail vanished. That was where I began. I contacted the investigator, a retired NYPD detective named Hargrove, who initially hesitated to speak with me due to client confidentiality. The client is dying, I argued, and I'm his medical proxy now. He's authorized me to access everything. Hargrove finally relented, and his files proved invaluable. Bank transactions, travel records, and a single blurry photo of a woman who resembled Veronica entering a South Carolina bank. Most crucially, he traced a wire transfer to a Miami account under the name Vivian Taylor. When I showed Martha my findings, she became an unexpected partner in this pursuit, her organizational skills complementing my relentless determination. "It makes sense now," she said. "International banking connections, quick escape routes to Caribbean countries with no extradition." I booked a flight to Miami, using most of my summer savings. When I stepped off the plane, the oppressive heat of the city hit me like a wall, but I stayed focused. I rented a small efficiency apartment in South Beach, chosen for its proximity to the financial district where Vivian Taylor had opened her account. For 3 days, I meticulously watched the bank from across the street, but I found nothing. On the 4th day, just as I was about to give up, I saw her. The woman emerged from a sleek silver Mercedes, her platinum blonde hair styled in a sophisticated bob. She wore oversized sunglasses, but the way she tilted her head while checking her phone, so familiar, sent a jolt through me. Veronica, my sister, living the glamorous life she had planned, while Eric wasted away in prison. I followed her to an upscale coffee shop where she chatted animatedly with an older, well-dressed man. They reviewed documents together, laughing occasionally, an image of successful business partners. I snapped pictures with my phone, my hands trembling with adrenaline. Back in my apartment, I researched the man. Harold Wexler, a prominent Miami real estate developer. His company's website listed Vivian Taylor as the Director of International Investments. My sister's reinvention was complete. The next lead came from an unexpected source. Eric had mentioned his former business partner, James Corgan, who had narrowly avoided indictment when the fraud was uncovered. Corgan had known something was wrong and had tried to warn me about Veronica, but I hadn't listened. After the scandal, Corgan had vanished from finance, apparently working as a sailing instructor in Connecticut. I drove 6 hours to find him. The man I found wasn't the polished banker from the news photos. Sun-withered and casually dressed, he adjusted rigging on a small sailboat. When he saw me, he froze. "You look just like her," he said. "I'm nothing like her," I replied, taking a seat beside him at a dockside restaurant. As we talked, Corgan filled in crucial gaps. Veronica had approached him first, long before Eric. She'd asked pointed questions about the business. "When was this?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "About 8 months before your wedding," he answered. That timeline hit me like a physical blow. Veronica had been plotting this while I was picking out wedding invitations and standing next to her at dress fittings. She wanted inside information about our firm. Corgan had warned Eric, but Eric had dismissed it. "He said I was just jealous," Corgan continued, "but I saw something predatory in her that he couldn't." The pieces began to fall into place, but I needed more. I returned to my parents' house in Millfield, where Veronica and I had grown up, and searched our childhood bedroom. After looking through everything, I found a hidden compartment in an antique jewelry box that had belonged to our grandmother. Inside was a small key with a numbered tag. a storage unit key. The facility was on the outskirts of town, one of those anonymous places where people store the remnants of failed marriages or deceased relatives' belongings. Unit 2, 27 contained a single plastic bin. Inside, I found journals documenting Veronica's resentments, photographs of me with tracked movements, and detailed notes about Eric dating back to high school. Most disturbing were files on other relationships she'd sabotaged, including an anonymous email that had driven away my college boyfriend. Veronica had systematically eliminated any chance of happiness in my life long before she took Eric. The first threat arrived soon after, a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." 2 days later, my classroom at Pinewood was vandalized. My desk had been rifled through and my files disturbed. The police called it a random act, but Martha and I knew better. "She's watching you," Martha said as we cleaned up the mess. "It means you're getting close to something that threatens her." The final threat came when a brick was thrown through my living room window, accompanied by a note, "Last warning." That's when I made the call to the FBI's white-collar crime division. "I know who really orchestrated the Patterson investment fraud," I said to Special Agent Diaz, "and I have proof. She's operating under a new identity in Miami." 2 weeks later, I sat in a Miami hotel room, a wire attached to my body. Agent Diaz went over the plan once more. "Meet Veronica at the upscale restaurant where you made reservations under your name," he said. "Your sister has proven she's ruthless when cornered." I nodded, examining my reflection. 5 years of pain had changed me. The timid, trusting sister Veronica had betrayed no longer existed. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with now," I replied. As I walked into the restaurant and saw Veronica sitting at a corner table, her platinum blonde hair gleaming under the lights, I felt an odd sense of calm. The woman who had systematically destroyed my life was sipping champagne, unaware that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. "Emma," she said, her voice cold and foreign as I slid into the chair across from her. What an unexpected surprise. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. They darted around the restaurant, calculating escape routes. The platinum blonde hair and designer dress couldn't mask the sister I had once known, the same calculating glint still hiding behind her facade. "Hello, Vivian," I said, emphasizing the false name, "or do you prefer Veronica when it's just family?" A fleeting look of discomfort passed across her face before she regained her composure, lifting her champagne flute in a mock toast. "I wondered how long it would take you to find me." "I'm impressed. Only 5 years. Would have been sooner if I'd known you were the mastermind all along." Her laugh was practiced, theatrical. "Mastermind? Always so dramatic, Emma," she teased. "I simply saw an opportunity for a better life and took it, at the expense of mine, by framing your boyfriend for your crimes." Veronica's posture stiffened, her shoulders tightening. "Eric made his own choices." I placed the letter Veronica had written to Eric on the table between us, watching her face as recognition slowly crept in. "You were just a stepping stone. Thanks for taking the fall," I quoted, meeting her gaze. "Those were your words, weren't they? Right before you disappeared with millions, leaving him to rot in prison." The first crack in her composure, her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice betraying a hint of panic. "Eric's dying of pancreatic cancer in Demura prison," I said calmly. "While you're reinventing yourself as Vivian Taylor, Director of International Investments." I leaned forward. "I also found your storage unit in Millfield, the journals, the evidence of how systematically you sabotaged every relationship I had." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You always had everything handed to you. The pretty one, the sweet one, everyone's favorite Turner daughter. Is that how you justified it? Destroying my life because you were jealous?" "I justified nothing," I snapped, the polished Miami socialite momentarily replaced by the bitter sister I'd never truly known. "I took what I deserved." "And Harold Wexler? Does he know his brilliant investment director is actually a fugitive who orchestrated a multi-million-dollar fraud that the SEC and FBI are both very interested in?" The colour drained from Veronica's face. She glanced at the door, then back at me. What do you want? Money? Is that why you're here? Justice, I replied simply, tapping my watch to ensure the recording device was capturing everything. For Eric. For me. For everyone you've hurt. Her smug mask shattered completely. You're wearing a wire. I didn't answer, but my expression must have confirmed her suspicion. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think you've won? Poor pathetic Emma, still trying to prove she matters. She laughed bitterly. Do you know how easy it was to take Eric from you? One conversation. That's all it took for him to forget 5 years with you. One promise of excitement beyond your suffocating small-town life. I locked eyes with her, refusing to let her words wound me. Tell me about the investment fraud, Veronica. About the documents you left for the FBI. She stood abruptly, gathering her purse. This conversation is over. It is, I agreed calmly, because federal agents are at every exit. Your new life is over, Veronica. As if on cue, Agent Diaz approached our table, badge displayed. Veronica Turner, you're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The look my sister gave me as they led her away wasn't rage or hatred. It was something closer to respect, a final acknowledgement that she had underestimated me completely. 2 weeks later, I sat beside Eric's hospital bed in the prison infirmary. The cancer had taken its toll, leaving him frail and jaundiced, his breathing laboured. I held his hand, telling him everything: Veronica's arrest, the recovered evidence, the additional charges being filed. She never loved me, did she? He asked, his voice barely audible. I don't think she knows how to love, I answered honestly. He nodded, eyes closing briefly. I tried to back out, you know. The morning of the wedding, I told her I couldn't go through with it, that I needed to tell you the truth. What happened? She threatened to tell everyone about a mistake I'd made at work, a client's account I'd briefly mishandled. She said she'd make sure I lost my license, my reputation. His grip tightened slightly. I was a coward, Emma. Afraid of scandal, of failure. I'm so sorry. We were both manipulated, I said, surprised to find that I meant it. In his final days, we found an unexpected peace. Not reconciliation, but a shared understanding of how thoroughly we'd both been deceived. When he died 3 weeks later, I was there, holding his hand as he slipped away. Martha and I attended his small funeral together, standing apart from the few others who came. Back in Millfield, we planted a maple tree in her backyard in his memory. Not for the man who had abandoned me, but for the fellow victim who had helped me find the truth. 8 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom for Veronica's sentencing. The evidence against her was overwhelming, not just for the original fraud, but for her subsequent crimes under her false identity. She sat expressionless at the defense table, never once looking in my direction. When called to deliver my victim impact statement, I approached the podium with steady steps. The courtroom fell silent as I faced the judge. My prepared statement was forgotten as I spoke from the heart. My sister stole more than money. She methodically destroyed my trust, my future, my capacity to believe in others. For 5 years, I lived half a life defined by her betrayal. But standing here today, I reclaim my story. Veronica's actions reflect on her character, not my worth. In seeking justice, I found myself again. The 15-year sentence provided no satisfaction, only closure. What truly healed me was the letter delivered by Martha 3 weeks after Eric's death. His final communication, written in shaky handwriting during his last days. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. There's one last truth I never told you. The morning of our wedding, I called your cell phone repeatedly. I wanted to confess everything, to beg your forgiveness. Veronica had taken your phone while helping you dress. She intercepted every call, told me you were having doubts too. Another manipulation in her grand design. I know it changes nothing, but I loved you, Emma. Try. In my weakness, I lost the one genuine thing in my life. Find happiness. You deserve it more than anyone I've known. 1 year after Veronica's sentencing, I stood in my empty Millfield home, boxes packed for my move to Boston. I had accepted a position at Brighton Academy, a prestigious private school that had recruited me after learning about my role in uncovering the fraud case that made national headlines. Martha arrived to say goodbye, bringing a small potted plant for my new apartment. "Ready for your fresh start?" she asked. "More than ready," I replied. As I drove away from Millfield, past the church where I had once waited in vain for a groom who never came, I felt no bitterness. The small-town teacher, defined by scandal and betrayal, was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced her deepest pain and emerged stronger. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't in Veronica's imprisonment or in exposing her crimes. It was in reclaiming my future, one brave choice at a time, in refusing to let her actions dictate the rest of my story. Some ties, even blood ties, are meant to be broken. And sometimes from those broken pieces, we build something stronger than before.